and welcome to the second hour of this special broadcast of the Republic News Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the second half of our special program, Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, our pre-election program. And we have, as our guest today, one of the leading experts in national security. He's a senior national security advisor. This gentleman's name is Bruce Moran, and Bruce has been on with us before. They did a program back in late September with he and his associate Chuck Floyd, and we talked about much of the issues that were going on with Hillary Clinton email problems and why it was almost unconscionable that James Comey, the director of the FBI, had pretty much given her a free pass. And since then, we've had a huge change in, I guess we would call it the perspective of the FBI at this point. And I'm going to read something here leading into this discussion that was a program with Megyn Kelly on Fox News, and this has been I believe just the other day, maybe today. And this is a quote by Megyn Kelly. She said, "We're a couple of days out from the election. This would have been good to know a few weeks ago for the record." And they're talking about the email process with James Comey. And on that call with him, or with her, was Rudy Giuliani. And this is a quote by Rudy Giuliani, and a quote, "Because my former assistant, Jim Comey, made the wrong decision in July," Giuliani replied, "you have outraged FBI agents that talk to me. They're outraged at the injustice. They're outraged by being turned down by the Justice Department to open a grand jury. They are convinced that Loretta Lynch has corrupted the Justice Department. You've got people in the Justice Department involved in this investigation who were defense lawyers for Clinton people. This is about as outrageous a corruption of the Justice Department that we've seen." Giuliani said that the dissension within the FBI is very real. And again, this is a quote by Giuliani. "These are men and women who uphold the law. They're not a bunch of slimy Washington politicians like the Obama administration and the people Clinton would bring in. And the reality is that they are outraged with what they have seen," the former prosecutor said. And again, this is another quote. "Mrs. Clinton has violated easily 20 to 30 federal laws," he continued. "I could outline them for you. I could show you how I could prosecute and convict her." That's unquote. And then Giuliani said that back in July, when he read FBI Director Comey's prosecutorial memo about the email case, it was just the opposite of what he said. He continued, quote, "Every reasonable prosecutor would have prosecuted the case in a second. I've won convictions on half the evidence that the FBI had gotten in July. And Jim has an FBI that's in revolt right now, and I think that's one of the reasons he came out and did what he did to try to control his agents, who, after all, are true law enforcement people. And what they see is some of the slimiest stuff that we've seen in Washington since probably Teapot Dome. This is the worst. This is worse than Watergate," Giuliani declared. "They've corrupted the State Department with pay to play, and they've corrupted the Justice Department. You can't go much further than that, Megyn," unquote. Okay, that's going to lead into our discussion with our guest tonight. Bruce Moran, would you kind of give everybody a little bit of an idea about some of your background, and then let's start to tackle this thing.
Yes, our specialty is crisis readiness, crisis preparedness, in providing our government and foreign governments with clear decision-making processes for, say, something like a cybersecurity system, 911 system, CENTCOM system. We would draw together contracts and different people from Avaya, Raytheon, and bring together groups of people who could actually go in and do tactical and strategical operations. My other side is the investigative side, and it helps clear up some of the areas that Rudy Giuliani is talking about, and how I work with the various groups in the House and Senate in those matters also. So let us go forward and talk about the critical matters at hand, which are the emails, WikiLeaks, and various matters that need to be discussed so the American people can be fully abreast of what is actually happening right now and where they need to cast their vote.
Well, I think that's a great lead-in, Bruce, and I have to tell people, I can't imagine that there's no one in our audience that knows what we're talking about, because literally the last 4 or 5 days have been nothing but a discussion of all the emails that have surfaced, all the information that's surfaced, and now through Huma Abedin, who happened to be Anthony Weiner's wife, who is also a major staff member for Hillary Rodham Clinton, the fact that there are 600,000 plus emails found on her shared computer with her husband Anthony Weiner, who is certainly a convicted pervert, and has had all kinds of problems in dealing with some of his crazy sexual preferences. But anyway, this is not the sort of thing that you want State Department and public officials to have access and have information on these sorts of home computers. And so with that, Bruce, I'd like to have you kind of talk about what the FBI's initial observations were about Hillary Clinton's home computers and what the real issues are as far as the illegality of her even having those, and if she does have those, how they violate everything that's part of national security standards. And that's a great way, I think, to start this discussion.
Sure. As we know, Hillary Clinton is and was the Secretary of State. Her sole responsibility, I like to emphasize that her sole responsibility was to protect all the employees at the State Department. I don't understand why people don't get that point. There are 68,000 people that are under her administration and her supervision. She's responsible for taking care of all the security, all the cybersecurity networks, and proper and fitting systems that need to be put in place. When Secretary Colin Powell came in office, he replaced, I believe it was 60, I'll look that up, hang on for a second. He replaced 44,000 laptops when he entered. He displaced all the IT people from the State Department. He talked to George Tenet, who was head of the CIA, brought them in to secure the State Department. And what does that mean? You have embassies, you have consulates, you have the State Department itself, where they work out of Washington, D.C., and this in and of itself is a large responsibility. It's an administrative responsibility. If Hillary Clinton didn't protect her own server and her staff what exposure does that leave us when she can't take care of her own personal business as well as having the devices secured at the State Department in the same manner? That's a question I always ask. And whose fault is it? It's Hillary Clinton's own fault, and she's blaming the Russians. Well, if you don't secure your own server, and your responsibility as Secretary of State is to make sure the entire State Department is secured, then you left yourself vulnerable, and it's her own fault. It's nobody's fault but Hillary Clinton's, and she's claiming to be a victim, and the Russians attacking her. That's fully incomprehensible. That's ridiculous.
It is, and I couldn't believe, and I'm being candid here, I couldn't believe that Donald Trump, in that third debate, when she started whining about how the Russians were helping Trump and how it was they were disclosing information, Trump should have just said, Hillary, it's your computers that they hacked, not mine. It's your computers that, in all your information, that were hacked. So if the Russians have your information, it's because you are an incompetent leader, and you should never have been Secretary of State. Am I off mark on that? With that, Bruce?
In her administrative capacity, she fully failed. And she also failed in her ability to protect herself. If she's a cabinet member, her sole responsibility is to protect all people, all communications, all classified information, all the diplomats that are traveling abroad, protect the embassies, protect Benghazi was an example of that. So you had a lot of issues arise from the ability of being Secretary of State and not being accountable and responsible in your job. When you're saying is, yes, what I'm saying, it goes beyond the scope of what most people are thinking about what she did, but from my perspective, how she didn't fulfill her job as Secretary of State for everybody in the Secretary of State Department, all the personnel, all the diplomats, all the different ambassadors, and all the consular generals. That's where I have a bone to pick, if I have to pick a bone there. I mean, you have all these people working there, and I don't know if people understand, but at every embassy there are people from the military. They call them the military liaison, the intelligence liaison, the economic liaison. They have all these people that can be compromised and blackmailed. And that's a travesty, because if they're not protected and the information leaks out where they're at, they can be blackmailed. Their families can be blackmailed. This goes beyond the scope of just the diplomats and the diplomatic corps. It goes into all those people who work with the State Department. We're talking about Special Operations Group, and that would be General Jerry Boykin. He would attest to this fact. If you're out in the field and your information gets compromised and your people get killed, it's only because of the lack of security in your communication systems or people not communicating directly on the ground correctly to each other. It's about capabilities and interoperability. It's about having the systems that are working in connectivity. And she didn't have that available to herself. And not having available to yourself and to your personal aides, that's as ridiculous gets, Dan.
Well, I agree. I agree with that understanding, and I also think that it portends not only a lack of accountability and someone who has such an incredible ego, and I think I've expressed this to you before, Bruce. I think she's a sociopath. I really do. But in her leaving all these personnel that were dependent on security because of her, I don't think we'll see the totality of all the security breaches and how many lives and how many careers that's going to cost I think maybe for decades.
You have me swallowing in my throat, because that's exactly the way I think. It's incomprehensible the amount of damage it could have done. In what capacity, we don't know. Now, when Hillary said she wasn't hacked, we know that may be not the case. And what do I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, James Comey said he didn't know, director of the FBI. Former Defense Department Gates in January, February last year said she's probably hacked by the Russians, and the Chinese or the Iranians. Right now we're looking at, she was hacked by, this was on the Fox News. She was hacked by the Russians, the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the Germans. And did they get through? Well, are they going to tell you they got through?
Well, that's right.
When they get through? If they block some, and that's only, we got 4, 5, 6, 7 days there of cyber attacks that they're accounting for. If they're working on a quantum system, which is far sophisticated than we're talking about that she has, they can come in, tap you on the shoulder, you look the other way, they're in and out. The sophistication of the cyber technology is way beyond what most people think. And you see the advertisements for the military, and they're going to, they're out at sea and they're preventing cyber attacks. That's really true. That's Raytheon. That's all the companies we know that work on these matters. But what we're talking about is personal devices.
Right.
Sharing
right.
notes.
And we're talking countries and people that can hack into the Pentagon's computers. And here we've got some, and I'm going to have to say it, a half-wit that's got a home computer in her barn that she's doing personal emails and handling international State Department issues. And the nonsensical nature of this thing just absolutely defies comprehension.
She was legally bound by law to take that private server as soon as she's sworn in and bring it over to the State Department at Foggy Bottom, where her office was. She was legally bound by law. She didn't do it. And then she had a different email. It wasn't .gov. It was her own Clinton, name and its own source code. So what you're looking at is completely obfuscating the system at the State Department, which is part of the entire government's security system. And what we have here is people looking at her as she's an ordinary person who had an email problem like everybody does on the street. She's not. She held the third, fourth highest position in the country. People don't realize that.
And the highest security clearance in the country.
But what I'm saying is, if there's no president, vice president, and no, then it's the Secretary of State who takes over as president. I don't know if you're aware of that. Yeah, that's what she's really responsible for taking care of her security for her personnel, and it wasn't done, and it's really a tragedy and a shame. And what we have to look at here is what's going to happen with the 600,000 other emails that were with Huma Abedin. That's another matter that needs to be discussed here. Did they have classified information on it? Did they have?
Sure they do.
Did they have special access program information on it, which means covert operations that were taking place? So how is it on Anthony Weiner's computer, and who had access to that? And if he had access to it, who other, like Cheryl Mills or Samuelson, did they have people that were friends or relatives have access to their information? So it starts to lead you to think that, well, if the security wasn't that sound, where do we go with it? And that's where the FBI is thinking about it. They have to think about, where are we exposed? How much exposure is there? What risks now exist? Who is compromised? Where are we going with it? in terms of nationally, where we go with it overseas. We have to do a complete forensic study, an audit of how this happened, what agencies gave them the information, what the information entailed, was redacted, how it was handled, who handled it. So I can go into greater detail like that, but I don't want to drive people crazy.
Well, one of the things, Bruce, that comes out of that is the fact that this woman is running for the highest office in our country, and if she is elected president, guess where that investigation will go? I mean, we know how this works. We know how abusive the power structure is in our country when they have the ability to control the legal environment. They're going to do so, and we've seen that already. And it pales any rational thought that we could possibly allow someone like that to be elected president.
I concur, and what I see here is the American voters not understanding the magnitude of what happened because it's not covered in the press in the dynamic we're talking about here. She calls it worthless hearsay. She says nothing was found. And then she goes
I
on
think Rudy Giuliani did a pretty good job of describing it, I think, about as effectively as you could in saying how, literally as an old prosecutor himself, that he had, from what he's seen, there's at least 20 or 30 federal laws that she's broken that would lead to conviction.
Yeah, he was talking about collusion, obstruction of justice, conflict of interest, fraud, RICO, criminal activities, grand jury, and special prosecutor appointments. Yeah. We're all thinking the same way. I try to keep it a little more simple because I don't want to go into the legal part. But what we do find here also is what actually happened. And I think when they're trying to rush the FBI to draw conclusions, the Democratic National Committee, Hillary Clinton, and all her surrogates and her staff procrastinating and giving emails to the FBI. And they procrastinated, and what that means is they try to play this out to the end, so they would forestall the investigation. Now that it turned on them, they're asking for the opposite to happen. They want a quick resolution. Well, you can't have a quick resolution when you need due process. You need to follow rule of law, and that's everything Rudy is talking about, all the different violations. I'll try to keep it more on a general notion here. So when you're looking at it from that way, there was no verdict found when Comey had given his recommendation to Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General. They said, well, we're not proceeding anywhere. So that means there was no grand jury, there's no prosecution, no verdict. So what does that mean? That means it's still wide open, and when the agents were rebelling because of that statement, that's where you saw Rudy Giuliani come on board and say, here's what happened, here's what was done, here's what we could look at. These are the possible violations under the rule of law. Here's what happens when you take it to the criminal activity level. And Rudy is, strong on all these issues. I'm trying to bring it back to where it kept the door open and where all the FBI agents rebelled. It was probably that, but there were other things that happened at the time that we look at, and we talk about what happened during the investigation itself. Well, do you think about that? I don't know if other people were thinking about that. They silenced the people investigating Hillary Clinton and her staff. They told all the FBI agents they had to sign non-disclosure agreements. Well, when you take an oath of office as an FBI agent, you're not going to disclose anything about an investigation. I think that's as crazy gets.
It is.
And then
it shows collusion.
Well, there's other things we can talk about here, and you'll find this very interesting. Then you had the immunity, ahistorical immunity. never seen 5 people get immunity in that capacity. And then Cheryl Mills, who was given immunity, represents Hillary Clinton when the FBI is going through that part of the investigation. It gets crazier. So if you think about that, well, she's a good attorney. Well, she was really a good attorney because she represented Bill Clinton during the impeachment. So you can see this is a carryover of the type of way they work. Mm-hmm. They're using the law. They know how to use the laws, and now they're using it to, get into the presidency by procrastinating. Then it came upon them to actually provide the evidence. Now they wanted to move forward really quick so they can win the election and then move forward, and that's what you're talking about.
And squelch the investigation. Right.
Yes. It's not only an investigation, it's everything that surrounds the investigation. Mm-hmm. It's all the people that they impacted. It's all the people that were disenfranchised because of their notion of what they want to be done to get that particular issue off the table. Mm-hmm. So what are we talking about? Well, what we're talking about is collusion, and we're talking about what really Giuliani's talking about. There's certain ways of manipulating the law, what you don't do, and it can move into such areas as RICO. If you have different kinds of monies being tossed around and people being bought out and fixing the elections, and you had different people in different parts of the media working to collude with them. We were talking about Podesta, and that was a WikiLeaks issue you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And that has a lot to do with the way they wanted to manipulate the American people's minds and move them forward past all the critical issues like we're talking about with the FBI investigation. They just gloss it over. So that kind of thing is really hypocritical. And like we were saying, let's get back to what we were talking about, the 600,000 emails. That is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is. And the fact that to analyze these properly, we've got to go back and find the source and who all those emails went out to, and then determine which one of those are actually under some sort of national security control, I guess, or limitation, and go back to all those. And to do that, that's going to take a long time.
Yep. They can probably quickly separate the ones that match that they already have, but here's the critical point. They bleach bit 30,000. If some of those start to come up that were bleach bit, how can we find out that they were bleach bit? Well, if they went from Huma to her, and then the information didn't come from the information that was supposed to be given to the FBI, that's a possible bleach bit document. But if it's corresponding to Cheryl Mills or goes into the CIA or DOD and it was classified and it was given top secret or special access program, if that was part of the bleach bit, we can figure it out by tracking it back to them, other people, and then the agency. See what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And then find out what was redacted and where it was redacted.
You better believe your sweet Pippi on that one. That's putting the nail right on the head into the coffin.
Well, that's why it's so important that this continues to proceed forward, and I think it's really imperative that, well, first of all, I think we need to thank the Judicial Watch, because they've stuck with this stuff, and because of them, a lot of this information has been made available, even though the FBI kind of walked or stood back from it. And so Judicial Watch has really been a huge help in discovering some of these new documents. Bruce, you worked with Congressman Darrell Issa, and you mentioned the House Oversight Committee. Jason Chavis wanted to discover how Deputy Director Andrew McCabe had come to the FBI, the timing of all this stuff, and how his directorship or deputy directorship may impact this case and the way it came forward earlier this summer. Would you kind of talk on that subject a little bit?
Sure. His wife was running for office in Virginia. Her name was Jill. Jill was running for a state position to be elected to their house. It wasn't a federal position, so you would think that that whole idea about her getting elected would be not a significant part of the whole process of the Virginia legislature. But as it turned out, she received monies from Governor McCullough and Hillary Clinton's PAC, and that added up to about $670,000. Since that's the wife of an FBI agent, well, you might want to take a look at if there are any ethical considerations about conflicts of interest. And that's the first thing we look at. What would be your thought on that?
Well, I would certainly think that would lead Andrew McCabe to recuse himself from the new investigative proceedings. And incidentally, I think we talked about this a little earlier, $675,000 going into a state senatorial campaign is an awful lot of money. I know in Montana, most of our senatorial campaigns are run on something in the neighborhood of $20,000 or possibly $30,000. So somewhere around 5% of that $675,000. That seems like an inordinate amount of money.
I would say so myself. Even if it was up to, say, $150,000, you're still looking at them pocketing $500,000. And that's something that needs to be looked at. What was the initial... Oh, here's what I think you're getting at, Dan, because we're talking about why the FBI agents were partially rebelling here, and they're having to feud amongst themselves. Because he, at that point, on I believe it was February 1st of this year, was appointed deputy director. And then you have to find out if this is just hearsay, but it appeared that they didn't pursue the Clinton Foundation. And was it his geist or not? I think that's one of the questions that need to be asked.
Yeah,
these are possibilities that exist. And it's behind the scenes, so it would be the director's responsibility to report to the American public what actually went on and if there was some type of conflict of interest there. And it's causing problems for the investigative process itself because it has to be justice blind, and this is not, when you have things of this nature creeping itself in, rearing its ugly head, you have to call into question, well, what is it? And that would be, Chairman Chavis's position. I would agree with that. You have to answer these questions because it gives you a clear idea about what was going on, what was being done, who was doing what, at what time was his involvement with the FBI investigation of Hillary Clinton, and what was his ideas and who did he affect? Did he work with the questioning of the staffers, HRC staffers, Hillary staffers? We don't know. And that's what Jason Chavis is getting at. It requires a lot of important information being disclosed from the FBI to a committee, probably behind closed doors, to see if there's any, probable cause for a conflict of interest or any other thing that could go on with collusion. So if there's nothing there, then nothing's there. But I mean, those are important questions to ask. You know, it has to do with
there's
the server.
huge questions to ask, Bruce, and one of the things that keeps coming back is the fact that Anthony Weiner's 600,000 emails that were on his server, that many of them came from his wife. It also appears that information had been shared to other parties, and right now we have no idea who those parties are or where that went to. And I mean, it could be very, very critical security issues involved with that as well. So the plot just thickens as we get deeper into this. It gets more and more murky and more convoluted and a lot slimier. And I know that you wanted to be on this call because you work with a lot of national security and law enforcement people in your everyday life. Tell me what. Well, tell me what you're what you're hearing from the security and the law enforcement community and how they feel about this whole thing.
Disgusted. They're disgusted.
Well, that's a good one-word answer, but flesh that out a little, if you would.
Well, I'm privy to a lot of information, so I have to keep it above board. And what we're talking about here is how does an investigation proceed? Where does it go? Who do you contact? Are they following investigative procedures? Are they working to disclose all possible evidence? And when you see that not happening, then you have a word I call disgusting attached to it.
Well, that's a good.
You have that, but you also have. Let's talk about another issue here that relates to it, because if you're having problems, where do you go in the State Department?
Well, when you've got to the very top person, where exactly do you go?
To the Inspector General.
Okay. And let's talk about that process.
Well, do they have an Inspector General at the State Department?
Well, I know they did because they talked about it.
By law, the 1978 law, they have to have one.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have one when Hillary was there? Obama did not appoint one.
Really?
Yes. And there wasn't one at the DOD, Department of Interior, Homeland Security. So there were. He did not officially have one appointed. And what do they do?
They're obviously there to discover improprieties. They're the ultimate whistleblowers at the very top.
Yeah. So what do you do if the department is stripped of that capacity? So they did have a person there. He was an appointed deputy director. His name was Geisel, but he wasn't a IG guy. He was a career member of the Foreign Service, so that he didn't have the capacity to do all the types of investigations or develop the issues that needed to be developed. The resources for the facilities, technology, consular affairs, all that. He was not capable of running a Inspector General's office when it came down to it. So during Benghazi, they had everybody sign non-disclosure agreements. Who came forward at the time? Do you remember? And he testified from the Benghazi Tripoli embassy. It was Hicks. But he had no recourse because he couldn't trust the Inspector General. They threw him under the rug. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do.
Yep. So when Greg Hicks was trying to get protected by the whistleblower protection, he was a lot of reprisals went up against him. So
well, that's the way
is,
it's been working with this administration.
So what I'm saying is Ambassador Geisel didn't have the capacity to really investigate, audit, or assess that kind of activity.
Mm-hmm.
You can basically say it said, "Ignore me, I am temporary," because he didn't really know how to handle the job. So it gets back to what the agents were talking about and why they're rebelling. You see what I'm talking about? You have to have the proper people in there to do the kind of things that investigate and audit, what I call a forensic audit in cybersecurity, because you have to go back and find the original source of the document, the CIA or the Department of Defense, find out what it was, what they were doing at the time, what priority had, top secret, special access program, and who you're going to deal with. Now I'm talking really fast, so I'm going to slow it down. So once you get there and find out what the information is and who has it, then you go to your Inspector General and tell them that something's wrong. If Gregory Hicks couldn't do it because the person who was in office wasn't a real Inspector General that had that capacity, but he was a professional, he was a professional ambassador. What do you do? What recourse do you have? He got thrown under the bus, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that tell other people who want to come forward in Benghazi?
Sure, that muzzles any of the whistleblowers that would come forward.
Okay, now let's take that to the example of the FBI. If you're signing non-disclosure agreements, because Greg Hicks and those people had to sign non-disclosure agreements, what does that do to the FBI?
Same thing.
Yes, sir. So there's equivalency I'm trying to draw here. And how can you tell an FBI agent who's sworn by oath not to disclose information, and you have them sign a non-disclosure agreement?
Yeah, you've got your point.
Yes, sir. So it has to do with the Inspector Generals and what their jobs are in each department and agency. So if they didn't really have an Inspector General in that capacity that would follow through and protect Hicks and let him, describe and give the evidence for what his position was, then how do other people in the State Department that were in Benghazi, were at the embassy in Tripoli, feel? Suppressed, put upon, and controlled, losing their jobs, transferred to another position that is not as important,
intimidated,
not put in a career slot that you're supposed to be put in.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me how the Justice Department, now I would think that justice, since that's their job, ultimately is to find whether something is worthy of prosecution when they see events like this happening. They know that there are no inspectors general in the various departments, including the State Department. How could Loretta Lynch just defer to James Comey and say, well, whatever you decide is okay with me?
Well, what you're saying is she washed her hands of making the decision.
She sure did.
Yes, that's what you're saying, and that's for political expediency purposes, basically what you're saying. And that is unacceptable because you have to make a decision. Because if it comes down to it and she makes a decision and then they find out there's criminal activity, then what does that look like? Because she knew there was dissension in the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
She knew that. And she knew those agents weren't all, gung-ho to do what they were told to do, and they weren't allowed to conduct the investigation which normal investigation proceedings take on to find evidence in the ways they look at evidence. So what does that say? Well, it's just, I use the word disgusting, but you also look at it as what? These people are very honorable.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole lives are dedicated to the FBI. All goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover and the integrity of the system. And if they're being compromised, or they feel they're being compromised, like we talked about, signing these letters of non-disclosure, immunity given to 5 people. The problem we had with possible conflict of interest with Andrew McCabe, the deputy director, we have that. So, and then the finding by Comey when Lynch should have done that. You have all these countervailing circumstances that say there's a lot of questions that need to be answered.
That's
and they're
right.
serious questions.
Mm-hmm.
And questions that the American public need to know too. Because you can't rush an FBI investigation. You can't get the kind of politically expedient solution you need if there is something serious national security-wise. It was her sole responsibility as the Secretary of State to protect everybody. If she can't protect herself in her own unsecured server, what does that say about the exposure for the rest of the people? Now, I think that's what the FBI has to investigate. Where did all these emails go? Who do they impact? And that's what you were saying earlier. We talk about it as a complete forensic investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the sources, and it's just amazing that if covert operations are being run, that people get killed.
Absolutely, and all these under-the-table dealings that have been going on, the fact that the Clinton Foundation has been receiving money, and this is something a lot of people don't seem to catch on to quickly, but the fact is
foreign governments giving money, which may be influencing the presidential campaign.
Exactly, and under our Constitution, it's illegal for our elected officials to receive money from foreign governments.
Or to get contracts through the State Department, and done in a way which looks conflict of interest for Bill and Hillary Clinton. That's what the Peter Schweitzer book was about, how cash is made. And,
right.
That's what talk about pay for play. So
Pay for play, and that's what we're hearing on a regular basis. I guess
I'm not covering that because I'm looking at it as a investigation point of view.
Sure.
If you look at it from a RICO point of view, from criminal activity, then the evidence has to point in that direction, and you have to have sound evidence. And if you don't have the investigation go forward, and it was kept from going forward because of your own investigation to emails as related to Hillary and her staffers, and did that compromise national security, then you have to say, let's look at the other areas, and why didn't it get taken up at that point in time. So it's not a matter of what you think is right, from because you have a presidential election. You got to do the important thing of opening up a complete investigation of how national security risk and exposures exist, and where they exist, and how they exist, and who could have been impacted by them. That's what I'm talking about. I think that's the important criteria I go by.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You get into pay for play and all these other things, and that can be part of it. That's what I'm saying. But
I think they'll discover an awful lot more after they get into a legitimate, thorough investigation of those 600,000 emails that Anthony Weiner has, because my understanding that at least a number of these are fairly original and have not been redacted, and my understanding is that the FBI went in and collected his computer, his laptop computer, his home computer, and the router for his home computer.
And his handheld, his phone. And
his
handheld. With Cheryl Mills and all her, that's what I'm saying. It has to go across the board now. Now that we've found it exists with Huma, we have to find out where it may exist in other places if they had sloppy standards for, keeping classified information. See, that's what I'm talking about. Once you find that, all these other things will proceed from there.
Exactly, and I think that's really important that
I don't jump to conclusions, as you can see. I say possible and, disgusting, but I mean, it's disgusting because you have to find out. It's really a national security problem on a larger scale.
Well, it is. Yeah, and it isn't a funny thing. I'm not trying to laugh because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's almost to the point where it's so incredibly beyond belief that this has happened in our country that
we pride ourselves on our national security.
Absolutely.
It's just mind-boggling that it's been compromised, and people think of it in a slipshod manner when they're, head of a department. And
the one thing that comes out of this last week's revelations of all the interior strife and so forth, and this is something I'd like to point out to our listeners, is the fact that our law enforcement, our military, our entire government community has an awful lot of really, really fine individuals that make up the rank and file. And
they're wonderful people. They're patriots. They love our country, and they love you too. And people need to understand that. They're not against anybody. They want to do the right things. This is America. This isn't a socialist country. We're not trying to suppress anybody. This is who we are. We are a people. We are the people of the United States of America with the U.S. Constitution, a God-given Constitution. And that's who we are.
Well, and that's exactly what we need to move forward, and we need to ask these people that are in law enforcement in the military. Quite frankly, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've wondered, why aren't they stepping forward? Why aren't they standing up? Because there are an awful lot of us out there, you being one, me being one, Bruce,
they're my friends.
Are taking a lot of personal risk.
I mean,
to say the things and do the things that we do.
You don't have to tell us. All the generals that are supporting Donald Trump, I mean, you have 200 plus, and they're not, they lost their jobs. We had 2 reasons they lost their jobs. One was political, okay? The other one was from attrition. He cut back on everything. So, and if you weren't part of that, whatever part you were on, you lost your job. And it's really demeaning for people who are in the military who dedicate themselves to protect our country. And you just can't do that. You just can't do that with people who are life members in the military services. And I have a deep, deep respect for them. I mean, not only are they my friends, but it's what they do. It's how they do it. It's how they put their lives on the line and risk themselves. It's unbelievable. So what we're talking about here is how our country was found through the revolution. It goes all the way back to that. How we fought the Civil War. How we evolved as a country, as a great, big, beautiful country of peoples. And it's not that way anymore.
Right.
And if our justice system is being compromised and you can't do a sound investigation, what does that say?
Mm-hmm.
Disgusting.
It is. It's disgusting. And the thing that I guess that's the reason that we put the 2 segments, the 2 different segments together tonight as a pre-election special edition of Connecting the Dots, is to show how much we have changed in this country over the last 100 years and how it's coming to a culmination where we either stand and protect our God-given liberties and stand up for what is right, or we better fold our tent and go home, because the reality is we're losing our country. And it's time for the voters in America to wake up, to smell the roses, and to pay enough attention to realize that right now, with what we have going on in our government, right now with Hillary Rodham Clinton, with Barack Obama, if we don't turn this ship around, we are screwed.
Federal, state, and local governments. We got to get our country back. We have rioting in the streets. We have stuff going on. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
Absolutely is, Bruce. Well, we're getting toward the end of the show, but what I would like to get from you maybe is kind of a wrap-up of what you would recommend, and I'm not talking about going out and voting for individuals or anything like that, but this is a pre-election special edition of Connecting the Dots, and what I would like from you is for you to tell us in a very patriotic way why it is so important that we get out and vote, that we support strong candidates who love our country and respect our Constitution.
How I look at it, the Constitution is supported by the executive branch, the Supreme Court, and the House of Representatives. They have to be in balance, and they have to respect each other. We have a decision to make here about the Supreme Court justices. I believe that we should follow the Constitution, and states' rights are very important. And I believe the justices should follow the way our founding fathers have been directed. It's first principles. And that's who we are. And that's how we should vote. We got to keep our country intact. We can't dismantle the Constitution. We can't change the Supreme Court into a court that's not going to follow the laws of the country, the Constitution. We have a Declaration of Independence we fought for, 1776. What does that mean to us? This is in their God, and that's who we are as a country. We're a God-given country. We have our independence from the British, and now we have to fight like the British did in Brexit. We have to rise up and become independent again and get our government back and put officials in office who are going to represent us and abide by the laws and not be bought out by special interests. That's who we are. We're a people of a people. We protect each other. We honor each other. We respect each other. That's who we are. And I'll close with that.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and I think that's a really good closing for the show. I need to remind our listeners that Bruce is a national security expert, and he is coming on this program because he feels that this is so important, and the happenings of the last week are so important that we need to really rethink the way we are looking at our government, and we need to get out and vote, and we need to get out and support candidates who believe in our Constitution. And so, Bruce, is there anything else you'd like to say on closing?
God bless America. God bless everybody that serves in the military services and intelligence community. God bless you for having the program.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and God bless you for having the decency, the honesty, and the integrity, and the love of your country that you would come forward and do a program like this. And ask our listeners to join us again next week after the election for another edition of Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel.
America, my wayward child, can't you hear the thunder and hoofbeats of a pale horse running wild?